This is the first video for the photosynthesis unit. This is photosynthesis part 1, which looks at an overview of photosynthesis and just focuses on the light-dependent reaction. I'm going to predict that this will actually require 2 videos to cover, and so you'll see that it will be named the same, photosynthesis part 1 overview, etc., but it'll say second video. So big picture, photosynthesis is the process by which photoautotrophs, so things that feed themselves, which are autotrophs, and specifically photo, which has to do with photosynthesis, these type of organisms convert the energy in sunlight into the energy stored in organic compounds. So it takes thermal and light energy and it converts it into chemical energy, which is going to be into sugar compounds. Don't forget the first law of thermodynamics. Please refer back to it if you do not remember, but we should be thinking about the first and second law of dynamics, which talks about the conservation of energy and also the existence of disorder within a system. What's important is that the sunlight is the source of energy that goes in as well as carbon dioxide and water, and the output is oxygen and glucose. The energy is conserved, so the same amount of energy goes in and comes out of this process. It is just 2 different forms. Also, we should start thinking about the term autotroph, which is a self-feeder, versus a heterotroph, which is going to get its food from other sources. Also, make sure that we remember what an organic compound is, specifically made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Usually they are sugar or carbohydrate molecules. The energy captured throughout photosynthesis forms the basis of our ecological pyramid. So if we think back to our ecology unit, the producers make the purest form of energy in the largest amount. For the amount of energy they take in versus put out, the scale weighs towards the output, which means that they're producing a lot of energy with very little use of that energy for its other processes. So plants don't move, plants don't need to specifically mate, therefore they don't waste energy doing that, they just store their energy. The biomass that is generated by producers basically supports all of the other consumers in the planet. Autotrophs capture energy and fix it into organic compounds, and then heterotrophs, just even primary consumers all the way to our tertiary consumers, consume the compounds to obtain that energy. And what we see is that those organisms, so our primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers, they consume energy, but they also expend a lot of it, moving, mating, regulating their temperature, doing all of these things. So therefore, they do not store that energy as well, whereas plants create that energy, they store it in the sugars, and they don't use it on self-processes. The leaves perform photosynthesis in plants, and it has specific parts that we should know. In a lab after our test, we will be looking at leaves. Essentially, from the top of the leaf to the bottom, the cuticle is the top. It is waxy, and it prevents water loss. Then we see our upper epidermis, which is a protective layer similar to our skin. The 2 mesophyll layers are going to contain all of our chloroplasts, which perform the photosynthesis, and then the lower epidermis is similar to the upper epidermis. It also provides all sorts of protection. The stoma are going to be the holes that are in the lower epidermis. This allows for selective water loss. They will close when there is a drought to keep water in. They will open to give off water if necessary, or other gases. We see that we also have the sheath cells and the xylem and phloem. This is going to transport the photosynthesis products and reactants to and from the leaves. Leaves have a ton of surface area to facilitate the absorption of sunlight, and they will absorb the sunlight via that surface area. think about, are there any drawbacks to having a large surface area? The most important thing to think about is that not only do they have the capacity to absorb a lot of materials, they can also lose a lot of materials in that way. So we want to think about evolutionary adaptations that plants have to prevent that from happening. Overview of a chloroplast structure. In eukaryotes, photosynthesis takes place inside the chloroplasts, which are inside cells, inside leaves. There are three specific membranes: the outer membrane, the inner membrane, and the thylakoid membrane. The thylakoids are the discs that we see in the image. They are arranged in stacks called grana, and that is specifically where the photosynthesis occurs. Chlorophyll and the other pigments that are involved in photosynthesis are basically embedded in the thylakoid membrane. The pigments in the thylakoid membrane, like chlorophyll, they are going to absorb different wavelengths of light. And so a little bit of background on this. This is some physics. Visible light, so the light that comes from the sun, is made up of different colors of light at different wavelengths. What we see is just the light, but if we look at it through a prism, we will see that it actually has the rainbow of lights. And light has a dual nature. Light exhibits properties of both waves and particles, also known as photons. So what does that mean? It means that the wavelength, the frequency, so how many times I have a wave, the greater the frequency, the more energy it has. And as a rule, purple, blue, and green light are going to have the most energy, whereas red and orange have the least amount of energy. These pigments are basically molecules that absorb light energy. So that light energy that has those waves, it's going to hit the pigments, namely chlorophyll, in the leaves, and those compounds are going to absorb the energy. Remember that bonds can absorb energy, and when they're broken, they release them. And so what happens is when the light hits those bonds, it absorbs the energy. Different pigments absorb different wavelengths. Chlorophyll A is going to absorb the red pigments. Chlorophyll B will absorb the blue wavelength pigments, and we have the carotenoids are going to absorb your orange pigments. And so we kind of get the whole range of the spectrum of colors when light hits the leaves being absorbed. Again, if we look, we see that these absorb a couple different wavelengths. Chlorophyll A is going to get both ends of the spectrum. B is going to focus mostly on one end of the spectrum, but it can do both. And then the carotenoids are going to specialize specifically in the blue and green area. This makes sense because we know that the purple, blue, and green wavelengths, they come at the highest frequency, therefore they contain the most energy. Take a minute to pause and kind of think about these answers. We've talked about it a little bit in this video, but definitely do that. Again, when we look at the absorption spectrum, we want to think about why we have those pigments, and can you make a relationship between these two images. The net overall equation for photosynthesis is this: 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters plus light from the sun is going to yield 1 molecule of sugar, C6H12O6, specifically glucose, and 6 oxygen atoms, or molecules specifically. Photosynthesis actually occurs in 2 stages, which is the kind of next step in learning photosynthesis. We probably did not cover much of this in general biology, so for the AP test, it's especially important that we understand the light independent and the light dependent reaction. The light reaction, or the light dependent reactions, are going to occur based on if there is light present. The Calvin cycle, also known as the dark cycle or the light independent reaction, can occur at any point. And again, this is kind of a simple overview of what we're about to go into more detail with. When light from the sun hits the thylakoids, the light reaction occurs and it creates ATP and NADPH, both of which are energy storing molecules. If we remember, they store the energy in their bonds. ATP has 3 phosphates attached and the energy is stored in those bonds. Similarly, NADPH contains a hydrogen, the hydrogen at the end of that name, and when it is broken off, it releases energy. That energy can provide the fuel for the Calvin cycle, or the dark reaction, and that occurs in the stroma, which is the fluid around the thylakoids, and that is what actually makes our carbs or our organic compounds. This animation kind of shows what's going on there. Feel free to highlight it and go there if you would like to. So, the light reactions. The light reaction of photosynthesis uses something called a photosystem. And a photosystem is a cluster of pigment molecules bound to proteins, along with something called a primary electron acceptor. Excuse me. So there are 2 photosystems involved, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. And they absorb different types of wavelengths. Photosystem 1 absorbs 680 nanometer wavelengths, whereas photosystem 2 absorbs wavelengths of about 700 nanometers. So when we're looking at this, the way we want to think about this is a cluster of pigments waiting to absorb light. One cluster absorbs a certain type of light really well, and the other absorbs a different type of light really well. They have these things called primary electron acceptors, which are going to absorb the energy that comes in from the light, or from the sun. In photosystem 2, which is the group of pigment molecules, specifically chlorophyll, it's going to absorb the energy in a photon, which is a particle of light, and it's going to excite an electron, and that electron moves to a higher energy level. Therefore, photosystem 1 has lost an electron. This electron is replaced by photolysis, the splitting of water using light, and oxygen is a byproduct of that. And so again, we see that the first step is that light shows up, it excites these electrons, and one of the electrons leaves the photosystem, and the photosystem becomes proton or electron deficient. To get it back to normal, water is split into oxygen and 2 hydrogen ions. The 2 hydrogen ions have 2 extra electrons, so it's put back into the photosystem, and the oxygen is the first product of photosynthesis, and it leaves the system completely. So the excited electron travels down something called the electron transport chain, made of increasingly electronegative cytochromes, basically losing energy as it goes. This energy is used to build a concentration gradient of protons. The process is called chemiosmosis. At the same time, photosystem 1, which is the other group of pigment, is also absorbing light, and it's exciting one of its electrons to a higher energy level, so therefore it loses an electron. We can hopefully see where this is going, that the electron that is slowly losing energy and coming back down to its unheightened state is going to replace that lost electron in the P700 photosystem. So that electron lost from photosystem 1 is replaced by the electron that was excited and subsequently lost from photosystem 2. So I know that it's backwards, but photosystem 2 is the first thing that gets excited. So it's a little bit backwards, but photosystem 2's electron that was excited has moved down the electron transport chain, and it arrives at photosystem 1. The excited electron from photosystem 1 travels down another electron transport chain, losing energy as it goes, and it ultimately is going to reduce NADP to NADPH. Essentially, all that means is that it binds with NADP and becomes NADPH, and it stores energy in that bond. So we have stored up energy now.